Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming on this last day before the holidays. So this is about getting results into practice. Until March the 10th, 2010, I didn't know anything about how to get research into practice because I didn't have anything useful to say. You know, I didn't need to know how to disseminate research results because I had nothing to disseminate. So, but on the 10th of March 2010, all of that changed. And so I suddenly found myself in a position of having something useful to say and not knowing how to say it. So we'd been working on, as I've told you many times, we were very interested in this treatment, tranexamic acid. And it's a treatment that's sold for heavy menstrual bleeding and the bleeding that you get after tooth extraction. And it works by stopping blood clots breaking down. So this is blood. This yellow stuff is fibrin. And when you're bleeding, this net of fibrin develops to stop the bleeding. But there's this enzyme in the blood called plasmin that chops this net up into little pieces, and so you bleed more quickly. And some very clever Japanese researchers in the 1950s identified a drug called tranexamic acid that stops that enzyme. It inhibits that enzyme. And we'd seen that it reduces death and bleeding in surgery, and we thought, well, the sort of bleeding that you get in surgery is very similar to the sort of bleeding that you get in car crashes and violence. This woman's been stabbed in the stomach. I mean, being stabbed in the stomach's not that different from being opened up by a surgeon. So we thought it should have the same effect. And we did this big trial called Crash-2, and we found it was effective. So we got this really good treatment benefit, a reduction in mortality with tranexamic acid, and it was even better if you give the treatment really early. So if you give this drug really early, it's really life-saving. So, and this is, death. So a 30% reduction in death is quite good, and it's not the play of chance. If you give it a little bit later, it gets a little bit less effective, but still quite effective. And if you give it late, it doesn't seem to work at all and might increase the risk. So, and it works everywhere. So it works, it doesn't seem to vary. It's equally effective wherever you use it. So because it was a big trial, we had 20,000 patients. We had hospitals in Asia, Latin America, Africa, Europe and Australia and Canada. And the treatment effect was the same. When you look at these sorts of graphs, the critical thing is there any heterogeneity? So you're not looking if these are all statistically significant compared to this. We're actually looking if this, and this vary from that, and they don't. So after doing research for about 20 years and never finding anything that works, suddenly we've found something that works. And, and then we worked out how many lives could you save with this treatment if it was used around the world. And we worked out that it was about 130,000 lives a year. So, wow, that's not bad. Most of the lives would be saved in countries like China and India, which have big populations and lots of trauma. but also countries like Brazil and the United States, where they like to shoot each other. They think it's a constitutional right to do that. So, you know, it's an important, we had an important message to disseminate, and, you know, who's going to do it? Highly cost effective, you know, it's really cheap. So, you know, if you had, I've talked about this earlier in the week, this is cost per life year gained. So if you had £1 million and you wanted to save lives with it, you'd first use it on insecticide-treated bed nets, because that's the best way to save a life. That's the most cost-effective treatment. So if you've got $1 million, you could save 20,000 lives with that $1 million by using it on insecticide-treated bed nets. You could save 17,000 lives if you use tranexamic acid in trauma, and you could save 800 lives if you used it as antiretroviral therapy. So this is, I mean, this refers back to some of the things I've been talking about in the week about, you know, the relative cost effectiveness as being the way we should determine our health priorities. And I mean, actually, the reverse happens because the HIV lobby is very strong, because people, you know, say, right, we must have antiretroviral treatment for the world. Like the woman in the hospital that was closed, you know, she was getting antiretroviral treatment. She wasn't getting anything, they weren't giving anything else in that hospital, but you could get antiretroviral treatment. So if we argue just for our problem, you know, actually we can do a lot of harm, or we can not do a lot of good. So I think, you know, tranexamic acid for trauma, it's highly cost effective, and once you've done insecticide-treated bed nets, it's a really good spend. So I thought, well, wow, my goodness, here I am. I've been doing research for 20 years. I've never shown anything to be effective until now. This is good, you know. I'm lucky, because, you know, a lot of people might go through their whole lives without showing anything to be effective. So very lucky. But I thought, well, you know, this is a lot of lives. It's a cheap generic drug. The pharmaceutical company isn't going to make sure that people get it. The pharmaceutical company isn't going to advertise this result to the world. So I'll try and do it. So I went to the funder, the British government funder, the National Institute of Health Research, and I said, look, we've got a great result. You funded this trial. You gave us £2 million to do this trial, and we've got this fantastic result that can save 130,000 lives a year. I want you to give me £500,000 to disseminate this result, right? So the trial cost £2 million, and we wanted £500,000 for dissemination. And I wrote I wrote proper argument why it's important to do this and what we're going to spend the money on. And so I asked them for £500,000. And they gave us 10,000. Right? They gave us 10,000. I mean, I don't know if that's good news or bad news. It could have been worse. It could have been worse, but it wasn't much better than worst. You know, we thought, oh, we can do we've really got an important message to send to the world. Now, if you can invest £2 million in generating this knowledge, surely you can invest £500,000 in disseminating this knowledge. But they said, no, it's not our job. And I thought, okay. Well, okay, so we take £10,000. And then that's a bit of a problem now, you know. Well, first of all, who believes it's my problem? I mean, to what extent do you believe that the researcher has got an obligation to disseminate results if they're important? Is it the researcher's job or somebody else's job? What do you think?
I feel that all of us should work for this.
You think it's... Do you think it's your responsibility to spread the news, or do you just publish the results in a journal and that stops there?
I think the researcher should push.
The researcher should push. I find some people feel the researcher should push, and other people think it's not the researcher's responsibility. Maybe we could have a show of hands. Who think it's the researcher's responsibility? Okay, so quite a few people think, and who thinks it's not their responsibility?
Epidemiologist.
Yeah, the responsibility of the statistician or the epidemiologist.
Not the researcher. Epidemiologist is a public health practitioner.
Public health practitioner, not the researcher.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, this is what I find. It's close to a 50-50 split. Some people think it's the obligation of the researcher, and some people think it's not the obligation of the researcher because, well, for a start, the researcher might not be any good at doing that, yeah? Because researchers are quite, I mean, we have a certain sort of, I don't know if this is true, maybe, I'll say it anyway. We have a certain kind of personality which tends to be more introverted and, focused. Do you know what I mean? So in my university, you have professors just wandering around the corridors, and you say good morning to them, and they go, oh! Because they're just lost in their thoughts. Yeah. Oh, hi! Whoa! You frighten them, and they're not the best people necessarily for disseminating the research, but I of the 50-50 split, I felt that the researchers have a responsibility. In fact, I feel that I trained as a doctor and then I moved into epidemiology because I felt that that's a more effective way of being a doctor. Yeah? That actually doctoring, you're doing stuff every day and you don't know if it's good or if it's bad. And so finding out if something's good or bad is a better way of being a doctor, I felt. So, and sometimes I think people ask me, are you clinical or non-clinical? I say, well, I'm clinical. In my mind, I'm clinical because I'm trying to find what's the right thing to do clinically. I mean, Dr. Furukawa, do you consider yourself a practicing psychiatrist? You might be as well.
Well, in my mind, I'm still a clinician.
That's it. I feel exactly the same as you. Although I don't see patients, we consider ourselves clinicians because actually finding out the right thing to do seems to be, a more effective way of doing medicine. So, £10,000. What can we do with £10,000? So the first thing we decided to invest it in is trying to get this treatment on the WHO list of essential medicines. And there's lots of bureaucracy to do that. And that took about 3 months, 3 to 6 months, and that used up all the £10,000. But we got the treatment on the WHO list of essential medicines. But the WHO doesn't do anything with that list. You just put the name on the list, and then countries may or may not buy that treatment, but it doesn't disseminate anything. It doesn't spread the word or anything like that. So we got it on the list of essential medicines, and then it was the summer holidays, and I was born in Wales, and I go back to Wales, and I was talking to my brother's son, my nephew, and he was a student at the time. He was a student of animation. He likes making cartoons. So he was a student animator at Bristol University, and I said to him, look, oh, you know, he was saying, you know, Uncle Ian, what's happening? And I said, well, you know, I've got this great result and I only got £10,000 and now I've spent it all. And he said, well, look, I'll make you a cartoon, right? So he goes up to his bedroom and then he comes down 3 months later and he's made this cartoon. So I'll show you the cartoon.
Systolic 100. Systolic 90. Get me blood. Tranexamic acid, given within 3 hours of injury, reduces the risk of bleeding to death by 30%. It works. Use it.
So he made that, and we thought, all right, so we posted it on YouTube, and it was very popular. People sent it to other people, and it got very popular, and it actually got picked up by the New York Times. So the New York Times wrote an article about it, and that made lots of people look at it. And then I thought, this is great. You know, we've got this viral video going about tranexamic acid and it's really cheap. So it was a very cheap way of disseminating research results. Until somebody rang me up from Google and they said, I'm terribly sorry, we have to take your video down. And I said, why? It's going so well, you know, why do you have to take it down? And they said, well, you're advertising a drug to the public, and you know, you can't do that. So, you know, YouTube is open to everybody, and there isn't, tranexamic acid is not licensed for use in trauma. It's licensed for use in heavy menstrual periods. You know, I could have made a video about heavy menstrual periods, but you can't make a video about trauma because it's not licensed for that use. Disappointed that I had to take it down.